Hey guys, it's Loaf with an update to my cycle starter. Just a quick PSA, my guides are very long and not intended for one sitting. There will be, however, intensive timestamps below to allow you to jump around to the parts of the build guide that you need help with most. I'll also make sure to include a budget planner, best in slot stat priorities, loot filters, and how to farm all the gear. As you can see with the gameplay footage, I have changed the direction of the build, used 3 different spell types rather than just focusing on Static Orb. I made this swap because EHG had made a drastic change to my original build right before the patch dropped. Even with that, I was still able to push 200 corruption within the first day without any real changes to the build. The original build was able to sustain mana without any gimmicks, and I was mainly playing as an auto bomber, essentially just using Evade to auto cast Static Orb the entire time, without really having to weave in any other spells. I can't go over the exact changes as they never left the test server, but due to those changes, I had to sacrifice a lot of my single target damage in order to sustain my mana cost. And since this is mainly a bossing focused cycle, I felt a change in direction was really needed for the build. The build I did end up going with was originally crafted by another creator. His name is Chunky Papa. I will go ahead and leave a link to his YouTube channel in the video description below. So make sure you guys go check him out. Consider giving his channel a subscription. He makes some really good content. Most of his videos are mainly showcases of the builds that they've created. And so this will be a good opportunity for us to break down the build, explain how to play it, and why we take certain nodes. So sorry for the really long-winded intro here, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the build guide. Alrighty guys, for the leveling setup, I do recommend just doing a standard Glacier Sorcerer, as the gear will just transition perfectly into the build. There should be little to no re-gearing whatsoever, just a couple passive changes. I will have all of the sliders available for the different skills and passive trees in here as well. I'm not going to go too in depth on this. Glacier Sorc is probably one of the most common OG builds that's been around. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. But it should kind of walk you through it. The only part I do want to address is a lot of people are going to ask, why is Meteor in the build? Meteor is used only for mana refund. So it's very, very important you listen to this part if you've never heard about the mana Meteor tech. So what you're going to do is you make your Meteor cost as much mana as possible. You can see right now it costs 214 mana. There's 3 nodes here called Aftermath. So after you cast a Meteor, you recover a portion of the mana spent over the next 3 seconds. So with the 3 nodes in there, you get 48% of your mana recovered back. And what we are doing with this is we pair it with the teleport node, Mana Tunnel, that makes it so your next spell you cast is refunded. So you will always cast Meteor after you teleport. Never cast Meteor any other time. So you cast Teleport, you cast Meteor. It's going to refund 100% of the cost of the Meteor for you on the teleport. But then additionally, you're going to get 48% of the mana cost, even though it didn't cost you anything, back over 3 seconds. So it's going to give you a ton of mana regen for free. This is going to make it feel so much more comfortable leveling with Glacier. You're not having to use focus as much. So just on cooldown, teleport, Meteor. The rest of the time, you're casting Glacier or Ice Barrage for extra damage. And then whenever you do go negative mana, that is when you're going to tap focus. So we'll go over some of these skills in more depth with the actual build planner as they use some of the same tech. But I just wanted to clear that up really quick because it's one of the most common questions I got asked on stream. So hopefully that helps you guys out. Hopefully that helps with your leveling experience. And then I will have a timestamp below on when to transition to the build. So look at one of the last timestamps. It will have a timestamp on there just saying when to change. So that will go over kind of the different requirements you need before you go into the main endgame build. Very first thing I want to tackle is how I set up legendary gear in my planners. So as you can see, all of the legendary gear in here is showing up as 4 legendary potential. Obviously, this is unrealistic for 99.9% of players, and I don't do it to showcase that this is needed by any way. But what I do is I set it up to show the priority of which stats you should try to be focusing for, and that way you kind of know what stats to be looking for on your gear. So for instance, the top priority stat for the Peak of the Mountain is going to be the T7 stat, which is the mana, And then next would be the T6 stat, the level of static orb, then the T5, increased armor, and lastly the T4 for the hybrid armor. So that's the way it's going to look all the way across the planner. So that way you can know kind of what to go for and what to aspire to try to get for the build. So don't freak out when you guys see that. I just wanted to quickly explain that. The next part that I want to go over is I will have a full planner without hardly any uniques. The only really required unique for this setup is the Harbinger of Stars. So I did have to leave that one in. However, this is a very common unique. It shouldn't be very hard to get this on both COF and on the Merchants Guild. So I'll have both of these planners set up for you, but we will mainly be focusing on the final setup version. So with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and start breaking down the various skills, and that way you can start understanding the synergy of how everything in the build works. For the first skill, we have Static Orb. This is the main damaging skill for our single target setup. So this is going to be the big nukes, what allows us to kill Avaroth within a few seconds. So main kind of centerpiece of the build. How Static Orb functions is you cast it, it shoots out a lightning ball in the target direction. It will pull enemies slightly in towards it, and then after a certain amount of distance, it will explode with how we have it set up. For all of the skills, I am going to have sliders there at the bottom so you can kind of see the skill progression. However, it is important to note that this isn't really a leveling setup. I will have a leveling planner in the video description for you. This is more of an end game setup. So the first nodes I would take is I would rush over and take the 1 point into Forking Surge. This creates, when the explosion happens for Static Orb, it shoots out these little tendrils that can also hit stuff. It can apply ailments and whatnot. However, this is mainly just a travel node for us. So we'll take the 1 point. The next 3 nodes are going to be Open Circuit. So this is going to make Static Orb's projectile travel faster and then give it 15% more damage. After that, we'll be taking Scatter Blast. So what this does is when you cast Static Orb, it's going to send out 4 additional smaller orbs in a cone in front of you. And then these small orbs will not do the same explosion or pull in. However, they still will benefit from all of the damage multipliers that we're going to be getting in the tree. So it's going to be a massive increase in DPS. Next up, we'll be taking the 1 point into Overcharge Detonation. What this does is Static Orb now explodes on hit rather than piercing enemies, and then the orb deals more damage per 1 mana cost. This is really important. This is going to be a synergy of the build. We are going to be stacking a crap ton of mana. Every part of our gear is really mana focused, and because there's going to be 2 different nodes within the Static Orb tree, they give you massive damage scalars based on your maximum mana. So that's going to be something to keep in the back of your mind here. So what this will do is it will add 2% more damage per 1 mana cost. Next up after that, we'll be taking the 1 point to Static Armor. This will give you Lightning Aegis. Lightning Aegis is a buff, which gives you 50% increased lightning damage and 25% less damage taken. So this will apply that buff to us for 2 seconds. This is mainly still a travel point, while Lightning Aegis is very good. We don't have a lot of extra points to be spending in here for more duration. We will be using it to get access to Storm Burst. So Storm Burst is going to make Static Orb deal 30% more damage, and the explosion will have 30% more area of effect. Now, the explosion will also happen on Static Orb after 4 meters. That's not really a big impact since we are already exploding whenever it hits a target anyways. It's just not going to be able to travel as far. After that, we'll be getting 1 travel point into Shocking Conduit, which will add a 30% shock chance. And then the other really, really massive node for Static Orb is Mana Charge. So Static Orb now deals more damage per 20 maximum mana. So instead of just going off of the Static Orb mana cost, this is going off of your over mana pool. So what it allows you to do is get 5% more damage per 20 maximum mana. So that is a massive multiplier, which is what's allowing us to kind of almost one-shot most mobs with Static Orb. The downside is it does make Static Orb costs a percentile of your maximum mana. So with all 5 points in, Static Orb is going to be costing 20% of our total maximum mana pool with each cast. With some of our other skills and some of our passive points, we'll go over kind of how we compensate for them. Next up, we'll be taking an additional travel point to Shocking Conduit, which is going to give us access to Storm Conductor. Storm Conductor makes Static Orb deal more spell damage to shocked enemies, so it's important to note that almost all of these multipliers in the skill tree are all more damage multipliers versus increased damage multipliers. So it is giving us drastically more damage. So getting 60% additional there is very big. And then if you do have the level of Static Orb on your helm, you can also pick up the extra point into critical trajectory, or if you have more nodes, they're all going to be dumped here, just giving us a little bit of extra critical strike multiplier, as this will be a critical strike build. And then that will wrap up the static orb tree. For the second skill here, we have teleport. So this is our movement skill. So it by default has a 5-second cooldown. You basically click with your mouse cursor and it will teleport you to that spot. So for the first points here, we will be taking 2 points originally into Crystalline Passage. That'll give you extra cold res and 100 extra armor if you've cast teleport in the last 4 seconds. We'll be then taking 1 point for now into Time Dilation. So any stat buffs granted by casting teleport now last longer. So it gives you an extra 20% duration. So that's going to include the previous node there. After that, we're mainly rushing over to get access to Mana Tunnel. So after casting teleport, your next direct spell cast refunds its mana cost. The downside is it makes teleport have a longer cooldown, so it adds an extra 6 seconds. The reason why this is so big is with our static orb, like we talked about, it's going to be costing more and more mana, the more maximum mana that we have. So this will give us a free cast that we can kind of weave into our spell rotation. Next up, we will be grabbing the 3 points into Tunnel Finder. Since we're adding an extra 6-second cooldown with the mana Tunnel node, this will help us recover some of that cooldown back. And then we'll be taking the point into Rock Phase. So Rock Phase is going to allow us to have a complete stun immunity if we've cast Teleport recently. We should have this almost up permanently, just making us basically stun immune the entire time. After grabbing that, we'll pick up the additional 2 points into Tunnel Finder to have 50% cooldown recovery of our teleport. And then we'll be grabbing the 4 points into Comet Rush. This will also give us another 20% cooldown recovery speed of teleport. And then if you have haste when you cast teleport, it resets the duration to 4 seconds. After that, we'll be filling out the original points that we had taken. So we'll be taking all 5 points into Crystalline Passage. We don't really care about the cold res, but the extra 250 armor is really big for some damage reduction. And then we're grabbing the remaining points of Time Dilation so we can increase the uptime of the buffs the teleport is giving us. And then that will wrap up the teleport skill. For the third skill, we have Glacier. Now, I know this has kind of been the flavor of the month. Every content creator you're seeing playing Sork is pretty much playing with Glacier. It is really important to note that Glacier is not actually dealing damage for us, but this is mainly a tool to give us access to a lot cooler things. So I'll break that kind of down, and it'll start making sense when you see the nodes I'm taking, that they're not really damage focused. So for the first couple points, we're going to be taking 1 travel point into Frost Grip. That gives us additional freeze rate multiplier and increased chance to stun, which isn't necessarily too bad with Glacier. We'll then be taking 2 points into Resplendent Frost. What this does is increases the base crit of Glacier. It's very important in this build to actually get a 100% crit chance on Glacier, but because we get 8% base just from the tree here, it makes it very easy to do. To give you an idea, every character by default has a 5% base crit. So anytime you add on your gear a 100% critical strike chance, you're not getting a 100% chance to critical strike, you're getting a 100% chance of your base crit. So typically if you had 5% base crit, you had 100%, now you have a 10% chance to crit. So this is more than doubling the amount of base crit that we have for Glacier. For the next point, the really big showcase and why it's so important to have 100% crit is critical rejuvenation. What this does is it makes any critical hit with Glacier grant mana back equal to a percentage of your maximum mana pool. Since we're having really heavy mana cost spells that we're casting, the larger mana pool we get, the more mana we're getting back when we're casting Glacier. So this is just a really, really nice node to make that so much easier to maintain our mana, especially during echoes. Very early on, even with very budget gear, you should have pretty much infinite amounts of mana. After that, we'll be taking the 4 points into Breaking Point. It is going to give us a damage multiplier, but that doesn't really matter. The main reason why we're taking it is for the 32% mana efficiency with Glacier, reducing its mana cost by quite a bit. Next, we'll be taking the 1.2 Static Collapse. What this does is it makes Glacier's critical strikes no longer deal extra damage. However, instead of casting Glacier right in front of us, we can actually target Glacier to start exploding anywhere on the screen. So we can put it to the very edge of our screen if we want, allowing us not to have to be right next to the target that we're fighting, giving us a lot more safety when we're pushing up higher corruptions. After that, we'll take the 3 points into Critical Barrier. So you gain ward on critical strikes with Glacier. Since we have 100% crit already, we're basically getting 15 ward every time that Glacier hits. So Glacier does 3 explosions in a row. It does a small, a medium, and a large explosion. So this is going to give us basically 45 ward for each of those explosions on each target it's hitting. So when you're hitting in a massive pack of monsters, this is going to give you a lot of ward. After that, the rest of these nodes are very, very minor. Since we don't really care about the damage output of Glacier, we're mainly taking stuff that adds extra survivability. So we're taking the additional 2 points into Frost Grip for the increased stun chance. Because it is a hefty spell, it still has a really high chance to stun. And then that will also give us access to Fading Echoes. What this does is it makes the explosions occur in reverse order. So instead of going a small explosion, a medium explosion, and a big explosion, it's now going to go a big explosion, a medium explosion, and a small explosion. The reason why that's kind of nice is because we're going to get that big AoE hit first. It's going to be more likely to stun more monsters. It's going to be more likely to proc other spells that we'll get into later. So it's just a little bit of quality of life. After that, we'll be taking the 4 points into Permafrost. This will give us a minus 60% damage multiplier, which doesn't matter, but then it gives us an additional 600% freeze rate multiplier, just to give Glacier a higher chance to freeze monsters. If stuff's stunned or frozen, we don't take damage. And then the last 2 points we're putting into Chilling Force, to also give Glacier a 25% chance to chill monsters, just to slow them down so it's harder for them to ever get close enough to hit us, just again for more survivability. And that's going to wrap up the Glacier skill tree. All right, for the 4th skill, we are going to be getting into Meteor. Now, I'm sure that sounds a little bit weird, but if you did watch the intro of the video and you saw me clearing the echo, I was spawning a whole bunch of meteors coming out of the sky. And how I was doing that, I'll get into most of the uniques later in the build, but this build is using a Harbinger of Stars. What that does is it gives you a 6 to 9% chance on crit to cast a meteor as long as you're above 0 mana. So that is how we are gaining access to Meteor. Since our Glacier already has 100% critical strike chance and it's hitting multiple times every time we cast it, it makes it so we can get access to a lot of Meteor spawns. Now, how we'll level this out is we'll be starting putting the 1 travel point to Force of Impact, which gets a higher chance to stun enemies. We're putting 3 points into Rapid Descent, which reduces some of the delay from when Meteor is cast to when it actually hits the ground. And then we'll be taking the point into Twin Meteors. What this does is it does add a 70 mana cost. However, instead of spawning 1 meteor whenever we crit, now it is spawning 2 meteors. After that, we'll be taking the travel point into Distant Crater. This will add a 15% damage multiplier on top of Meteor, and then the fall radius will be increased by 15%. So what that means is the original location of 1 meteor versus the second meteor will be spread out slightly more. After that, we will be taking the 4 points into Mana Fall to gain a 40% mana efficiency with Meteor. We're going to be proccing a lot of these really, really fast with Glacier, so it is important to make them cost as little mana as possible. Next up, we will be taking the 3 points into Meteor Shower. So now this is going to give us an additional 3 meteors. So So instead of dropping 2 meteors, we're now dropping 5 meteors with every proc that we get. This does, however, reduce the area of effect of each meteor by 45%, but it is definitely worth it with getting that much more extra damage per cast. Next, we'll be taking the 1 point into rapid impacts. So the fall frequency, how fast each of the meteors is coming out with each crit that we're proccing, is increased by 35%. That is mainly a travel point, though, to get access to Rain of Fire, which just adds another meteor cast. So not every time we proc that belt, instead of casting the 1 meteor, we're getting 6 meteors casting, which is an insane amount. That's why on some of those bigger packs, the entire screen just gets flooded with meteors, and it's super cool. After that, we will be taking the 1 point into Crushing Force. This is going to give us a 7% damage multiplier, as well as an additional 7% to enemies that are at full health. The full health part will never actually proc, since we're always hitting the monster first with Glacier, they're never at full health. But that is mainly just a travel point to gain access to Infernal Descent. So this will add a 50% damage multiplier, with the downside of Meteor having a 25% increased cast speed. However, the downside never applies to us, since all of our meteors are being procced by another skill, so this is only a positive damage multiplier. And then the very last point we're going to put into Craterborn. What this does is it makes it so whenever we proc a meteor, it's going to give us the Craterborn buff, which gives us 15% Fire Pen, but more importantly, 15% increased cast speed, because that cast speed will apply to when we're casting Glacier. Then that will wrap up the Meteor tree. For the final skill, we have Focus. Now, before you panic when you see Focus, as it seems to be a love-hate for a lot of people, Focus is only used for bosses. With the Glacier Mana Sustain, we're basically just able to spam cast Glacier throughout Echoes without having really any mana issues. And the higher mana pool you get, the easier that will be. This is kind of just that oh crap button if you accidentally lose track of your mana and kind of your rotations, and you go into the negative, you can pop this and instantly get a huge chunk of your mana back. Or for bossing, if you want to get a really big boss or burst window on the boss, you can just spam cast a bunch of static orbs like you saw in Aberoth, and then you can instantly get a bunch of your mana back. So for leveling this, it is a pretty standard setup. We are going to be taking the 2 points in a mana flooded, so we have a 50% increased mana regen while we're channeling Focus. We'll take the 1 point into Desperate Mediation. What this does is it will allow us to have increased mana regen per missing mana. And then the super big nodes here, Null Profusion. So casting Focus while at negative mana instantly grants mana equal to a percentage of your maximum mana. So with us having such a large mana pool, the mana regen doesn't really do anything. Like what's 50 mana regen when you have 2,000 mana, right? So this will instantly give you back 20% of your mana while you are negative, but it does add a 5-second cooldown to Focus. Like I was saying before, we don't really cast Focus unless we're on bosses, so the 5-second cooldown is not really a big deal. And then here with Null Infusion, casting Focus while at negative mana instantly grants mana equal back to a percentage of your maximum mana. So basically the same thing that we got from Null Profusion, except now we're getting an additional 20%. So it's giving us back 40% of our maximum mana. So no matter how much mana we have, it's still going to give us almost half that mana pool back instantly. So if we have 2,000 mana, we're getting almost 1,000 mana back right away. And then does add an additional 4 seconds to the cooldown. So now that we've got all the mana nodes, next, it can be a little bit scary sitting there and channeling Focus. You typically want to wait until you're not going to get hit by something like a boss ability. However, these next nodes will help keep us alive a little bit better if we do have to do that during a boss fight. We'll be taking the 5 nodes into Shocking Aura. This is going to make it so we have a 250% chance to shock nearby enemies each second while we're channeling Focus. However, it's also going to make us take 25% less damage from shocked enemies. So that's going to be really big for help keeping us alive. Next, we'll be taking the 4 points into Iron Stance. This will give us 48% more armor while we're channeling, as well as it will give us 12 flat armor per intelligence on the build. We are stacking a lot of intelligence along with mana with the character, so this will give us a metric crap ton of armor to help negate a lot of those hit damages coming through. And then for the remaining 3 points, we'll be putting it to Chilling Aura. This works very similar to the other node, where it gives you a 100% chill chance to nearby enemies while you're channeling, and it makes us take 10% less damage from chilled enemies. And then that will wrap up all of the skills. So hopefully that makes sense. You can start seeing how the build is coming together and how it'll synergize with each other. And so when we start going through the passive points, you'll have kind of a better understanding of the character. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get into the passive tree. Just like the skills, I am going to have a slider at the bottom of the passive tree so you can kind of see progression and when you'll take certain nodes. For the first 8 points, we're going to be putting them into Arcanist. This is going to give us +8 intelligence. This will be a ward focus build as well with mana. So intelligence is going to give all of our abilities generic damage increases. This is very important since we're using a cold, lightning, and a fire skill, as well as it will give us ward retention. So that way our ward decays at a slower rate. On top of that, it comes with the bonus of giving us 24% fire res and lightning res. Next, we'll be putting the 2 points into Scholar. That'll give us a little bit of increased health and a little bit of flat mana. And more importantly, you'll give us access to this next row of passives. Next, we'll be putting the 5 points into Mage Flurry. This will give us 15% increased cast speed. And then it has a 3-point bonus that gives you 9% cooldown recovery speed for teleport. Same thing with the teleport tree. We are taking cooldown reduction everywhere in that tree because we're adding that extra duration of teleport. And the lower the cooldown we can get, the more free static orb cast that we can get while we're running through our echoes. After that, we'll be taking the 5 points into Knowledge of Destruction. We do need to get 100% critical strike chance of some of our skills, so this will give us 35% increased critical strike chance, as well as 15% critical strike multiplier. And then that will wrap up the base mage tree. Next, we'll start going into the sorcerer tree. So the first 5 points in sorcerer is going into calculated destruction. So an additional 5 intelligence with the 5-point bonus where you get increased spell critical strike chance per intelligence. So every 1 point of intelligence is giving you 3% spell crit. It should be very easy to get over 100 crit chance, or 100 intelligence on a mage. So that's just a whole bunch of extra free spell crit on a stat we already wanted. After that, we'll be putting the 5 points into Arcane Momentum. So what this does is whenever you cast a spell, you gain a stack of Arcane Momentum for 2 seconds. And then if you gain a new stack of Arcane Momentum, it will refresh all of these stacks' duration. And each stack of Arcane Momentum gives you 5% increased cast speed. So this will give you a total of 25% cast speed, just allowing you to pump out those glaciers even faster, which is going to give you more meteors. Next up, we'll be taking the 6 points into Essence of Celerity. What this will do is it will make the Arcane Momentum stacks also give you 12% increased spell damage per stack and increase the duration of each stack by 60%, making it a little bit easier to have 100% uptime on the stacks. It also comes with a 6-point bonus that's going to give us 10% move speed. This is actually super, super important when we start breaking down the unique items that we're going to be using with the build. Next, we'll be taking 5 points into Lost Knowledge. This is the #1 defensive node out of the entire build. This node is absolutely busted with the new meta. So how this works is you gain ward based on your current mana when you use a skill that costs at least 40 mana. So all of our skills are pretty much costing 40 mana. The Glacier, Static Orb, everything that we're casting to do damage is costing over 40 mana. And so we are going to be proccing a whole bunch of ward based on our massive mana pool. So this is part that just endlessly scales as you increase the gear on the character. This is a character that can start off on a reasonable budget and then just scale to the moon with different nodes, such as Lost Knowledge here. So just a massive defensive barrier here for us. Next up, we'll be taking the 5 points into Mana Shell. This will give us 20 flat mana, 10 ward per second. But most importantly, with the 5-point bonus, we're going to get ward per second per 10 maximum mana. That's going to give us 1 ward per second per 10 maximum mana. Just a whole bunch of passive ward gain. Next, we'll be taking the 6 points into Wisdom. They'll give us an additional 18 flat mana, 18% mana regen, and a 6-point bonus that increases maximum regen per 100 maximum mana. At this point, I'm sure you're getting the synergies that are coming all together. We stack mana. Mana gives us quality of life. It gives us defense. It gives us damage. This gives us everything. So mana is king in this build. Next, we'll be taking the 8 points in our Arcane Insight. That will give us an additional 8 Intelligence, as well as it is coming with a 8-point bonus where we get additional Ward Decay Threshold per Intelligence. So Ward Decay Threshold works very similar to Ward Retention, where it helps prevent our ward from degenning and keeping it at a higher kind of base value. So we're going to get 5 Ward Decay Threshold per Intelligence. After that, we'll be taking 1 point to Crackling Precision. That'll give us a little bit of increased critical strike chance, but it'll also give us access to Arcane Obliteration for an additional 50% spell critical strike multiplier, which is really big since most of our skills will be at 100% critical strike chance. After that, we'll be putting 5 points into one of the coolest nodes that they added to the Sorcerer with this upcoming patch. So Archmage. How Archmage works is it gives you 5 flat spell damage, and then it gives you a chance to recover 20% of your maximum mana. Or sorry, not maximum mana, the mana of the actual spell skill. So if a skill costs 100 mana, it's going to give you a 35% chance to refund 20 mana. Now, there's a special part here at the bottom that is a little bit confusing at first, so I'll break it down for you. So if you have over 300 maximum mana, instead of getting 5 flat spell damage and a 35% chance to refund 20% of mana cost, it is going to give you 10 flat spell damage and a 70% chance to refund 20% of your mana cost. And then again, with the 1000 maximum mana, which is very easy to get on this build, it is going to give you 15 flat damage and a 100% chance to refund 20% of your mana cost, which is really, really big with how much mana we are spending on this build. Next up, we'll be taking the 5 points to Mana Well. Mana Well is one of the very few nodes that will give you percentile mana increase. So most of the other nodes you've seen so far have all been flat mana. This will give you 15% increased maximum mana, and then it gives you an amazing 3-point bonus that gives you 50% of your mana that you spend as ward. So with that ridiculous mana cost multiplier that we're getting on our static orb, it is going to give us an insane amount of ward every time we cast it. After that, we'll be taking the 5 points into Recollection, which will give us 25% cooldown recovery speed, which will help us get up more teleports. Next, we'll be going into the Rune Master Tree. So we're going to start out with the first 6 points into Unsealed Mana for the 18 flat mana and the 18% increased cast speed. Sadly, the 5-point bonus does not actually do anything for us, as it requires you to cost an ability 3 times in a row that costs 0 mana, which we don't have any abilities like that. Next up, we'll be taking the 5 points into Rune Word Cataclysm. That will give us 60% increased critical strike chance, and it comes with a 5-point bonus that when you critically strike an enemy, you gain the buff Rune Word Cataclysm for 6 seconds. What that buff does is it causes you to do 15% more damage against low health enemies. Low health enemies are typically 30% less or lower amount of health. So that's going to be really big for bosses, not going to do much for area clear. Most stuff you're going to be one-shotting in echoes. However, for big bosses, that is a massive damage multiplier. After that, we'll be taking the 2 points into Sphere of Protection. It's going to make us take 2% less damage against shocked enemies. We mainly just need points to get access to some of the other nodes farther in the tree. We'll also be taking 1 point to Arcane Focus. This will give us 1 Intelligence, and it'll give us 2 Ward on direct spellcast. That is also a travel point. Most of our spells are just really heavy cost mana spells. We're not going to be spamming them as fast as something we could like Lightning Blast, so this node has a lot less use. After that, we'll be getting the 6 points into Mental Catalysis, which will give us 6 additional Intelligence if we have a Catalyst equipped, which we will, as well as a 36% of bonus damage from critical strikes will not apply to us while we have a Catalyst equipped. This will be really big. Every single build either wants a 100% chance to evade the critical strikes, or it wants 100% reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes. So this will give us a good chunk on our way there. After that, we'll be taking the 6 points into Inscribed Instruments. That will give us a 48% critical strike multiplier if we have a wand equipped, which will be the weapon of choice for us. Next, we'll be taking the 1 travel point into Never Late. This will give us a little bit of extra crit and flat damage if we have casted our teleport recently for the next spell that we cast. But the main reason is to get the access to the 3 points of Rune of Dilation, which what it does is after using teleport, you gain increased cast speed and movement speed for a short duration. So we have 3 points, which means we'll have 3 seconds after we cast teleport to get increased cast speed and movement speed. That will be really important when we go over the unique wand that we're going to be using for the build. For the remaining 2 points, we're just going to throw into Spellslinger. It's going to give us +1 to flat damage and 3% increased cast speed per point. It's bugged right now, so it's not showing that it's got 2 points in there, but that'll be 2 flat damage and 6% cast speed there. And then that will wrap up all of the passive tree points. So hopefully that is starting to make a lot more sense. You're seeing how everything synergizes together. You're seeing kind of the focus of the mana scaling, intelligence scaling with the build, and then it'll make a lot more sense when we start going over the gear choices that we are going with. Alrighty, next up, let's go over the different uniques that we are using with the build. There is only one required unique, like I talked about before. The rest just make the build a lot stronger once you get them and have a lot of synergies with the build. So the only required unique is the Harbinger of Stars. That is what allows you to cast Meteor on crit. So when you're spamming your glaciers, it starts raining down meteors from the sky. Without this belt, the build will not function. You will not have any clear speed. It's going to feel terrible. So just make sure you have this belt. It is a random drop, which means you can use Runes of Ascendance on any base belt to attempt to get this. You can also use Prophecies to acquire this belt. Otherwise, what it does also is increases the meteor fall speed, so they're coming down faster. Gives you an extra level to meteor. It makes you take less damage for each meteor you've cast recently, and it will give you a little bit of mana back whenever you use a potion, which is whatever. So really key part of the build to have this belt. The next unique, as far as importance go for making the build function smoothly, is I'd recommend the Peak of the Mountain. What this does is it gives you a metric crap ton of crit chance. It is kind of hard to crit cap in this build, so this is going to give you a majority of your crit chance. Now, this unique only drops from a boss. It drops from the Lightless Arbor dungeon boss. You only need to be able to complete tier 1 in order to obtain this. So at tier 1, it gives you a 45% chance. And even if you are able to do tier 4, it only gives you a 50% chance. So the hardest to easiest difficulty is only a 5% drop chance difference. You should only have to run this, 2-3 times to get it. So you need a Lightless Arbor key. You go to the Lightless Arbor dungeon, you kill the boss, you can get the helmet there. Just really try to focus on getting the mana or static orb on top of it. That will make a very big difference. The next unique is the Wrong Warp. This is the rarest unique in the build, but it does have a lot of good synergies. Again, it is not required. Some people don't like the Wrong Warp playstyle, and that's totally fine. You can just use the Crystal Wand. Check out the other build planner without any uniques in it to kind of see what you could use instead. But the reason why we use it is a Crystal Wand base, so it's going to give us 60 mana. And then on top of that, what it does is when you cast Teleport, you are teleported to a random location, but you become immune to all damage for 1 second, and you gain the Chrono Warp buff for 10 seconds. What Chrono Warp does is it gives you 35% increased cast speed and move speed, and when you teleport, you time lock up to 10 enemies around the destination for 1 second. What that means is they basically just can't move. It's like they're stunned. And then bosses, instead of being time warped, are just slowed for 1 second. And then you will also get a chance to gain haste on hit. And then the big part here is you get 3% increased spell damage per 1% movement speed. With everything set up properly, you can get like a few hundred percent spell damage just from using this. That's why right before you do your big boss burst, you're just going to cast Teleport really quick, and it's going to give you a whole bunch of damage. And then on top of everything, it also gives you increased cooldown recovery for your Teleport. So just a really strong multiplier, but not required in any way. It is a random drop, so again, Runes of Ascendance, Prophecies can be used to acquire this. It does not come off of any boss. Next up, we have the Julra's Star Dial. So this is dropped off of the Temporal Sanctum dungeon boss. You can get it from tier 1 all the way to tier 4. At tier 1, you have a 100% chance to drop this ring. So it's recommended just to run tier 1 to get as many of these as possible. That way, there's no other legendaries or uniques in the pool to go against it there. It is guaranteed to drop with 1 legendary potential as well. It is very difficult to get more than 1 legendary potential, though the main thing you're just trying to slam on this is either get an intelligence roll or a spell damage roll. And then what it does is it gives you mana spent gained as ward. We spend a lot of mana on this build, so you're going to require a lot of ward. It gives you increased spell damage, and then the big kicker here is when you use a movement skill, it triples the stats that are on this item for 4 seconds with a 12-second cooldown. So the mana spent gained as ward, the increased spell damage, and then whatever you slam on this all get tripled when you use teleport. So you can see kind of the synergy between using Jewel Res and using a Wrong Warp. Every time you use teleport, you're just getting a massive crap ton of damage for your big burst windows with Static Orb. So I do use 2 of them on here just to get the most bang for your buck, to get set up those kind of one-shot burst windows for bosses. Next up, we have the Transient Rest. This is another random drop unique. It is very, very common. You've probably already found one just kind of going through the game. The reason why we use it is a bunch of resistance. And then the really big part is you get 40 to 60% of your current mana gained as ward when you stop moving. So it only has a 2-second cooldown too. So anytime you stop moving to cast something, it's just going to give you a big burst of ward. And since we're already stacking so much mana, it's just a whole bunch of extra survivability for free, basically. So you, again, don't need this. You can use any Exalted pair of boots or any regular pair of boots that you have. This just gives you a lot of synergy and covers a lot of resistance for free. Next, we have the Strong Mind Amulet, another super, super common unique. If you're on the Merchants Guild, you can get 2 LP versions of this amulet for literally 0 gold. There is like 20 of them on the market right now for 0 gold. You can buy a 3 LP one for pretty cheap. 4 LP gets a little expensive, but the reason why we use it is it gives us a bunch of flat mana already on it. And then the big part here is you get 200% of your maximum mana added as stun avoidance. So it's going to make it so you're almost never stunned. We do get some stun immunity already from teleport, but this should help cover that in between when we don't have that stun immunity. The explosions are basically never going to happen because of how much mana we have. But this is just a really easy to get amulet with high LP where you can double slam mana. So you already have mana on it, you have 60 mana, and then you can slam, up to a T7 mana roll that gives you another 140 mana on there. So you can get 200 mana just off of your amulet. So it's a really, really strong amulet to get for really, really inexpensive. So highly recommend doing that. Otherwise, you can just use, really any Exalted or regular amulet. The last unique that's probably got a lot of people puzzled is the Grimoire of Necrotic Elixirs. So the reason why we use this, you can ignore all of the stats on here except the last 2. One of them, it's just a freebie. We get 40% less necrotic, void, and poison damage taken for 4 seconds on potion use. But the really, really big part is that we get 30 to 40 flat necrotic damage, 2 spells for 4 seconds on potion use. So right before you are about to open up on a boss, you're going to cast a couple glaciers to get your buffs rolling. Then you're going to teleport, hit a potion, and just spam static orbs, right? So that way you get the teleport buffs from the rings and the wrong warp, and then you get the buff from this. The reason why the necrotic damage is so big, we have so many more multipliers on static orb that it gives us a massive crap ton of damage, as well as or Meteor. Meteor has a 900% increased effectiveness for added spell damage. So it just gives it insane damage. So you can't get any more damage off of any other item. If you don't have this, you can always just use any other regular mana relic. However, this is a awesome, very, very common relic. You get 2 LP ones for free. I think it's like 10,000 gold or something to buy a 3 LP one. If you're on Merchant or if you're on, COF, you set up like a couple prophecies for unique relics, and these are just going to be raining down from the sky. So most of the uniques on this build are very, very, very common. The only one that's even remotely rare is Wrong Warp. But yeah, like I said, only need the belt to function. Grab these as you can. Prioritize getting the helmet after the belt first. And then that kind of wraps up the uniques that we use for the build. All right, as far as the other gear goes, we only have two spots that we eventually don't want uniques in, and that is going to be the offhand and the gloves. First off, I want to go over the offhand crystal skull. So you don't have to use a crystal skull if you don't want to, or if you can't afford one. Yet they are a little bit rare. The main thing that we're looking for is the spell critical strike chance it gives you, because that is a base critical strike chance. So similar to the nodes in Glacier, so that almost doubles your base crit chance if you get a 6%. So you really want to prioritize on getting the 6% over versus like 3% as the highest priority for this offhand. Even more important than getting mana, getting that base crit. If you can't afford a Crystal Skull, you can always grab one of the other crit bases. So you can grab an Osprey Skull that goes up to 5% crit. I'd really recommend if you can't get Crystal Skull to get that one. You could also use a Branded Skull that goes up to 3% crit though. So just make sure you're getting a base crit offhand as high as possible. Other than that, you're mainly focusing on getting a mana. If you aren't at least like 85, 90% critical strike chance, then get spell crit on there. Otherwise, you can get crit multi, and then just get whatever res that you're needing still on your gear. As far as the gloves, we are a little bit res starved since we're using so many different uniques. So I use the Crusader gloves for the void res. And then again, you're going to prioritize getting mana on there if you can. And then intelligence or crit chance for the prefixes. You can also get cast speed is not terrible. It's good to get some armor shred effect to help out a little bit on harder bosses if you're not one-shotting them, and then whatever res you need on there. We don't really need life on this gear. We get so much ward, so you don't need to worry about getting any like hybrid life or anything like that. As far as the idols go, the 3x1 idols, we are looking for double mana. So flat mana and percentile armor slash mana are your kind of go-tos. The other option that you can get if you can't find these is mana spent gain this ward is also an okay one until you can get the percentile mana. As far as the 4x1s, we're going for increased area for elemental area skills and the percentile mana. For the 2x1s, we're just looking for a stun duration and whatever res you need. So on these, you can get void, necrotic, and physical res. And then lastly, these little 1x1s, increase stun chance, and then again, physical, necrotic, or void res, or poison res, whichever one that you guys need. For the blessings, I've only highlighted the ones that impact your actual character's performance. All of the other ones just influence drop rates. So we have the critical strike multiplier from the Black Sun. The biggest one here is the flat mana from the Ending Storm. The all res from Reign of Dragons. Percentile armor from Age of Winter. And flat armor from Spirits of Fire. And then that'll wrap up all of the regular pieces of gear, the idols, and the blessings. Alrighty, guys. For the build rotation, I just kind of want to go over it quickly for you, as it is a little bit more complex than some other builds, where sometimes you don't want to be casting some of your builds. So as far as area clear goes, you're basically, when you're running through echoes, you're going to be casting teleport on cooldown. After every teleport cast, since we do get a free spell after that, we are going to do a static orb. Since it costs 307 mana, that will make it for free. So you don't want to be using static orb too much while you're running through echoes, as it's going to drain your mana, and it's not really needed to kill much. So you're mainly just going to be casting teleport, throwing in a random static orb for damage, and then just spamming glaciers the rest of the time to spawn meteors. They won't spawn as much against a single target, but if you get a group of enemies that you're hitting, you should just get a whole bunch of meteors raining from the sky. Your mana pool should be able to cover itself just with the glacier mana that's coming. As far as the other abilities, you're basically only ever casting focus when you get negative mana. So this needs to show negative, so I'll show you right here real quick. So you see how it has a negative number? That is when you're going to use it. You never want to use it on when it's positive. It's hardly going to give you any mana back. But if you do use it while it is in a negative state, you can see I instantly got a bunch of my mana back, and now I'm back already at half, and I can keep spamming glaciers. I'm sure by now you guys also noticed I have Arcane Ascendance on my bar, even though I am not spec'd into it. The reason being, we don't need Meteor on our bar, and this gives us a bunch of extra burst for bossing. So for bossing, what we're going to be looking to do is we're going to be looking to cast a few glaciers so we can get the stacks of arcane momentum. as well as get our haste buff and rune word cataclysm. So cast enough where you get 5, make sure that 5 doesn't fall off, and then you will be rapidly hitting teleport, a potion, and arcane ascendance, and then you're just going to be spamming static orb. So you'll go teleport, potion, arcane ascendance, and just nuke out your mana with the rest of the static orbs. And that should basically one-tap most of the bosses there within your mana window. So hopefully that makes sense. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to help you guys out with the build rotation. Echo Clear should be very, very simple and straightforward. You're basically just spam casting Glacier. Let me know if you guys have any questions about the bossing setup. All right, guys, and the next thing I want to go over is how to import the loot filters. The loot filters are going to be in the video description below. There's going to be a leveling loot filter as well as a strict endgame loot filter. So click on the one that's most applicable to you, and then it's going to pull open a link that's going to look like a paste bin. It's going to look something like this. What you're going to want to do is hold down the Control key and click A. It is going to highlight all of the text inside of the paste bin. Then you can either click Control C or right click and copy. Once you have that copied over to your clipboard, you're going to go in game. You're going to click Shift F. It's going to pull open a page like this. You're going to click this little plus sign at the top. Do not click Create New Loot Filter. Instead, click Paste Clipboard Contents. And then that is going to implement it. You can name it whatever you would like. I'll put YouTube test. Confirm, and then you're good to go. And then the loot filter is all set up. So that's how you'll add the loot filter. As far as how I have the strict loot filter set up, everything in green is for Merchants Guild. So if you guys are playing COF and you don't want to see a bunch of stuff or other builds, just go ahead and uncheck anything in green all the way up to this one. And then I would leave everything else. The red modifiers are for shatters. So those are rare mods such as like class-specific mods, increase levels to static orb and such. The blue mods are the experimental mods that drop off the exiled mages. And then we just basically have all of the different exalted mods that you'd be looking for. Some of them do not have base types. Those are specific items that are being used to slam into unique pieces of gear with legendary potential. Otherwise, if it's a slot that we don't use a unique item, it will have the base types on there as well. So hopefully that makes sense for everybody. Hopefully you guys know how to do the loot filter stuff. If you do have any questions or run into any issues with my loot filter, please let me know in the comments. I'll try to get it fixed as soon as I can and get it updated into the video description. Alrighty, guys. The next part I want to go over, that's probably going to be the number one question that I get for the build, is when can I switch to this build from the leveling Glacier Sork? So there are 3 things I would recommend having before you make the switch. The first thing is going to be that you are at least level 60 plus. You're probably going to be a lot higher before you hit the other requirements, but at least be level 60. That way you can get access to the Archmage nodes for the mana refund. The second thing I would recommend is being at least 1000 mana or higher. That way you have the 100% chance to refund 20% of your mana. That will help out a lot. Plus, at that mana pool, it will start making more sense to use Static Orb as your main boss damage, as it's going to start getting more multipliers. The third thing is you need the Harbinger Meteor belt. You must have that, even if it's a bad roll, it should work for the time being. Just make sure that you have that belt. So once you have all 3 of those things checked, then that's when you can start transitioning over to this build and start really feeling good and not having to run into a ton of mana issues while you're going through echoes. Obviously, the higher mana pool you get, the more quality of life you get, the smoother everything's going to feel. Once you hit that like 1900 mana range, that is when you can just infinitely spam Glacier, even on single target bosses, and you will never run out of mana with the Meteor spams. Obviously, if you're bursting them down with Static Orb, you're still going to run out of mana, but that 1900 range is like the next threshold of being like God tier. So hopefully that helps you guys out. If you did enjoy the video, consider giving it a like or leaving me a comment. It helps me out with the algorithm. Lets me know that that you want to see more of this type of content. I apologize it took me so long to get this out. Between streaming full time and having a wife and kid, I've been pretty busy with the cycle start and just trying to catch up on sleep and all of that. I'm hopefully going to have a new video out soon with the rogue that I've been playing and just smashing bosses with and doing boss carries on. So look out for that. Hopefully next week I can have that out sometime, and then we'll kind of go from there. But thank you guys all for being here, and thanks for watching the video. Love all of you guys. Have a good one.